Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Musings. I have Mr. Jay Hedley on the show today. Thanks for jumping on, Jay.
Another episode of what?
Musings.
Musings.
That's
Okay.
correct. I said musings the other day. I was like, fuck, am I a
Bit of a
cow?
muse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Musings. And, one of the reasons being is that a lot of the reasons I did the podcast in this fashion was just so I could have more of a conversation style podcast that I find things that are interesting and let's pull them apart and talk about them, and rather than the classic, especially with people in the fitness industry. So what are the three things that motivate you the most, Jay? Having that sort of like just tiresome, boring information that I constantly heard again and again. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. So yeah, musings was a concept so that we could have a discussion and see where it goes.
Great. So let's do that.
So I first come across, let's back up a bit. Let's get the listeners a bit of a background to you first, if that's okay, to where you're at, and then I'll throw in some questions, and that'll lead to more content that will be relevant, I suppose. So if you can give the listeners just a brief background of who you are and what you do.
So I'm one of the managing partners. There are three of us. One of the managing partners of an organisation called the Coaching Room. Coaching Room is a diverse business. It falls into kind of two halves. One is the public side and one is the corporate side. On the public side, we are by far the largest NLP communications provider in Australia. We're just also moving into New Zealand now. We're in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Hobart, and we're moving into Auckland in next year and opening up programs there. As part of our NLP communications programs, we run coach training and coach development programs. So we actually the fastest growing coach development organization as well. And so people come and do NLP for their personal development, and they come and do it for their professional communication development as either a leader or a coach. Leader as coach inside their organization, or a professional coach, either in the fields of life coaching, sales coaching, career coaching, business coaching, that sort of stuff. On the other side of our business is the corporate, and in executive coaching, we again would be the largest and definitely still fastest growing in the executive coaching field in Australia. So we coach literally all over Australia and indeed all over the world, where we globally. I personally work with CEOs mainly, and their executive teams of global institutions, and that includes airlines, it includes Department of Defense, it includes all the way down to not-for-profit organizations, various government institutions, both state and federally. And recently, the main growing part of our developmental coaching has been sports coaching. And so, much to the disgust of some of your listeners who'll be Brumbies fans, I work with Waratahs Rugby, with the executive, with the coaches, and with the players. And I also work with Formula One driving team, the Red Bull team. I also work with professional boxers and those sorts of things. And we're really expanding in that area. So we're getting more and more knock-on effect and referrals into all kinds of different aspects of sport, which is very exciting because sport's a passion of mine. So that's a background on me and the organisation, the Coaching Room.
Fantastic. So I came across you last year in the Coaching Room first, actually, last year. My partner booked us a NLP course, the NLP practitioner course. Correct me if I label any of these things incorrectly, which was 2 sets of 4-day weekends over the space of about a month in Sydney. And I first came across NLP through, I'm certain it was old mate Tony Robbins, probably about, 29? It's probably about 11 years ago. And say that again.
Do his fire walk.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't actually go to his programs at all. I couldn't afford them. I listened to his CDs and I read his books. But I still remember actually, and I lived with a friend of mine. He was 10 years older than me at the time, and still is 10 years older than me. I listened to some Tony Robbins CDs and I was like, oh, this is some good stuff, right? I hadn't been exposed to this type of thinking before. And I went to offer it to him and he's like, nah, man, I don't need that shit. And I was like, oh man, right. Okay. Well, I find it really interesting. And so I kind of just went about listening and reading that stuff in private for a long time. But ever since sort of understanding NLP a little bit and getting a little bit more exposure to it, I found it really difficult to find some teachers or organizations that taught it that I aligned with on a value set. They always felt like something was off. And so first, before we go into sort of the coaching room and why I actually really like you guys, because I'm also doing Master Prac, and I think it's ACM this year. Yeah, ACMC, that's correct. Before we go into that, can you explain to me and to the listeners, what is NLP? Neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah, so let's start with that. So the neuro is pointing to your neurology. Linguistic is how you language and represent your experience. And programming is how you do that in an habituated way. So how you language and code through language your experience, how you represent the world to yourself then affects your neurology, and how you do all of that in a programmed way without needing to think about it now in order of efficiency. So the value of doing that is we don't have to do nearly as much thinking. And so it's a bit like talking. Hey, you probably don't remember learning how to talk, but learning how to talk was probably the hardest thing you've learned to do in your life. It took you around about 3 to 4 years to be able to talk in simple stage structures, and you know, you were constantly corrected and you were constantly advised and mentored in the use of words and how to craft them to communicate effectively, even just with your parents. And to do that, when your parents taught you how to talk, they gave you the meanings of those words, the embodied meanings. Embodied is the neurology part, so we embody meanings, and the values and the beliefs and the identity structures that were all given to you. NLP is the study of how you now use that to run yourself. And so where that works for you and where that absolutely doesn't work for you, where that enables potential and where that holds potential back. And so new linguistic programming comes from the 70s from three guys, Grinder, Bandler, and a guy called Frank Pucelik. And the three of them studied the positive psychology movement, and that included Abraham Maslow, it included Rollo May, it included a bunch of these Fritz Perls, people in the field of psychology who were very well regarded. Milton Erickson was another one, Virginia Satir was another one. In the field of psychology and therapy, who were doing extraordinary things, but weren't clear on how they were doing them. They just knew how to do them. Grinder and Bandler and Frank Pucelik came along, and then Anthony Robbins was an early part of that movement, one of Bandler's students, along with Tad James and a few others. You know, Tad's very old now. I think he's getting into his late 70s. And so these guys came together and really were experiential. They would just take these new concepts and ideas that they had modeled out of these geniuses, and they would apply them in new and radical ways and use them on themselves, and began to be able to replicate what these geniuses were doing. And so they created a model of how they replicated that, and that's NLP in and of itself. So NLP is a model of how to model subjective experience. And so it is mapping somebody's inner game, their internal experience that runs their external experience. So the thoughts and feelings, beliefs, values, identity, program structures that run, that code and run how they do what they do, that code and run their reactions and their responses in the world, in short.
So what you're saying is that if we can change or alter the identity, the thoughts, the beliefs, the values, that would also alter the experience that we have in the outside world.
Well, the first part is bringing awareness to how you're doing that. You can't change something that you're aware of.
Okay.
And so that's one of the misnomers that people think that NLP is a model for change. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
NLP is the study of how you do what you do. So it's the study of how we do our pour in a game, and it's also simultaneously the study of how we do potential. And so to study how you do what you do doesn't presuppose you need to change it. It's just looking at it. It's looking at that subjective experience and making it objective so that you can quality check it. And so that you can ask it. In NLP, we only ask one question, not is it right or is it wrong? And there's no judgment. It simply, does it serve you? Does it enable you to get where you're trying to go? Does it enable you to actualize your intention? And if it doesn't, then it looks at what's then the leverage point for change, given it's not enabling your potential, even though the structure itself might intend, it might have a positive intention attached to it. That is, it means to work, but it doesn't. The execution lets down the intention. And so an example of that is procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
So most people listening to this will at some stage procrastinate. But procrastination is an incredible skill. It's to put off things that you tell yourself are important to you. So number one, you've got to be able to tell yourself that something's important to you. And number two, you've got to resist that priority and somehow put it off because you have a secondary intention, a secondary commitment that you haven't become aware of, that's ensuring that you don't run your primary commitment because it would mean that your secondary commitment wouldn't be achieved. And the secondary commitment will sit outside of awareness running the game.
Mm.
So in NLP, we're constantly looking at what's the secondary commitment. Robert Keegan calls it the immunity to change. And the immunity to change, he's a developmentalist. The immunity
I've read that book.
Hey, yeah.
So I've read that book, yeah.
The immunity to change is a metaphor for how we want to change, but there are hidden prior commitments that stop us from changing.
Mm.
And so NLP gets to those hidden prior commitments and reveals them and reveals their real intention and asks, are you achieving this intention? And if you're not, then the intention's good, but the strategy needs changing. And so NLP gives us a way to identify and lay out the strategy so that we can find the leverage point in it for acceleration.
Okay. So you said something there at the start about getting something that's subjective and making it objective.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a bit more to me and understanding, obviously, that subjective things such as thoughts, but then turning it into objective thing that you could almost point at. So that's how I understand those two things. So if you could explain it.
So it is bringing to light, bringing to awareness what you are unaware of, but at some level, absolutely aware of. You're just not consciously aware of it.
Right.
So a limiting decision is a classic example. So I may have made a decision in my life that really early on as a child, through watching my parents, that money, for example, doesn't actually enable happiness because my parents had money, but yet they fought all the time. And so I might have connected the two and gone, money equals not happiness. And now my commitment to happiness, for example, stops me from having the money I want to have because I have a frame. I'm not saying this is true, I'm just making it up.
Sure.
But I've had plenty of clients come in with these kind of frames. But that a commitment to happiness precludes me making money. So every time I go to make money, there's some kind of self-sabotage that stops me from achieving that, because I've got a prior commitment to happiness, which doesn't include money, would be an example of something like that. There are plenty of them.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I looked at my relationship with money sort of mid to maybe when I was about 26. And I remembered Mum told me always to pay rent first. That was one. So I thought, hang on a sec, when am I paying my mortgage? But then also I remember when I was much younger, and I would ask Dad for some money to buy some red frogs at the hockey. And he's like, "Man, I don't have any money. We're broke." Like, and that obviously, if he tells me that, I'm like, "Oh, okay," and I just walk away, rather than saying, "Mate, you've had enough sugar." Like, I'm not a parent. I didn't tell him how to parent me. "Dad, don't say that. It's going to cause damage later on." But it was understanding. He's like, "Fuck, mate, you're away all the time. And then when we spend time together, you don't even have money to give me to buy red frogs." It's like, that's shit. And so understanding those sorts of things and reflecting back on, hang on a sec, what's my relationship based with money when I can't even afford red frogs when Dad's not home, was quite interesting, and having that sort of self-reflection. So would that be something, looking at something subjective and then bringing it to making it objective? Would that be an example?
Are red frogs a treat for you now?
I fucking love red frogs.
Hello. Can you hear that frame that's still governing your game? You see, red frogs were an untenable treat. And so you love red frogs now, not because you like them now, but because you couldn't have them then, is a classic human coding of an experience. So now you're not eating the red frogs, you're eating what your dad couldn't give you. Do you see? You're eating meaning.
Sure.
And so that is what subjective experience is about. And so in that example, I was just able to pull up and reveal through, because I caught the semantically loaded words, red frog, and feed that back to you in a way that made it objective to you. That's what we mean by subject-object. Now it's objective to you. Before they were just red frogs, even though you had the red frog story back there in the cinema of your mind running, you probably hadn't connected it to your love of red frogs now.
Yeah, it was almost like if I behaved, I got red frogs. So now that I'm an adult, I'm allowed to behave all the time and feel good about it just because I can go buy red frogs whenever I want.
Exactly, yeah.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, and so making objective what is subjective allows us to free ourselves from those old frames that have got nothing to do with who we are now, that are coming from a far less mature version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so let's say you weren't aware of that. Now you're scoffing down red frogs. Now you're going through a hard time in your life. And where do you go to? You go to red frogs. You're eating, a bag of red frogs a day. You're starting to put on weight. Then you got the identity structure that I'm a gym instructor, and I shouldn't, be like this. I shouldn't be eating these things. I should be more disciplined than this. And look, I'm putting weight on. This is ridiculous. It's not the kind of muscle weight that I want to have on. Now you've got an identity crisis starting to arise for you. Now you're having a real struggle, and you don't know why you're having the struggle. You don't know why you can't say no to yourself about those bloody red frogs, because they're running you, because it's not the red frogs, it's the frame about them and the meaning and the coding of the subjective experience of Dad's love through a red frog that you weren't aware was there prior to understanding it. You've just made objective what was subjective, and that's what NLP is all about.
Yeah, super interesting. There you go. Now, one of the other things you mentioned was positive intention. And this was something that I learned, I may have heard previously, but never really put weight behind it. I believe it's an NLP presupposition that every action or behavior has a positive intention. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. And
for a given human being, yes, it is positive for everyone,
right?
But the intention is, and the action may not be positive, but the intention for the given human being is always positive for them. There's always a payoff. So even screaming at your kids, there's a positive intention, and the positive intention is to let them know that what you're screaming about is important to you. Now, it might have the opposite effect, where it actually communicates to the child. They receive it as a lack of care. They receive it as aggressive and abrasive, they receive it as I've done something wrong. Doesn't mean that that's the intention of what was communicated. That might be the meaning of what was communicated, but not the intention of what was communicated. So there isn't an action that a human being takes without there being a positive intention for them. Once we can understand the positive intention, we can start to ask them, is this action getting you what you intend? Is it getting you what you really want? Is it enabling you? Is this action serving the intention that you have? And if not, is there, what would a new and different strategy look like to achieve that intention that would mean taking a different action? I.e., instead of yelling at your kids, slowing everything down, which is counterintuitive because you're trying to move the kids along, sitting down with them and sharing from your heart what is truly important about what it is you're trying to communicate and why it's important to you and why it's important to them and what it's going to give them that they can't see yet. And then doing that a 5 or a 6 or a 7 times until the child begins to embody and understand, hey, this is really important. And if I want to get what I want, which is mum or dad's love, care, consideration, I want some independence, etc., then if I'm able to be there in a way that is supportive for them, then I can also get them to be there in a way which is supportive to me. Now suddenly I become influential as a child, and I start making very, very different decisions. And now not only that, but I'm starting to learn how influence works, and I'm starting to learn how I can influence people in an empowering and positive way, is a communication and a life skill instead of yelling at the kids. But it takes time, and it takes a person getting deeply objective to what they're subject to, which is their own frames running their game. Normally those frames for a parent is that's the way they were parented. And even at the time they didn't like it, they still find themselves parenting that way because that's the model that they were given. That's the book that they were given, the manual that they were given on how to parent. And so they go straight from the manual, even though it didn't work for them, and use it with their kids.
So what would you, if you had someone listening to this and resonate with that a bit too much and think that, maybe that they're not behaving in a way that will be supportive for the long-term development of the child, and they should use a different map, what would you recommend to that person?
Go get yourself a developmental coach. Go actually work on the stuff you need to work on, or go, come on down to our NLP course and learn how to communicate effectively. The work is the work of clearing.
Okay.
So in order to parenting in our world is leading. And leading occurs in parenting, it occurs in managing people, it occurs in influencing clients. All of that's leading in our world. And so first and foremost, before a person can learn how to lead, they need to learn how to lead themselves. And so leading themselves means that they are doing the work of clearing themselves of their shit, of the stuff from their upbringing that's still running the inner game, which is still running the outer game, and running their reactions. Yeah. And by doing the work of clearing that stuff out, they can become more responsive versus reactive. React means they've done it before. Responsive is in the moment. It's a new emergent property of the present moment. Whereas a reaction is an action from a less mature version of you than you are today. Responsiveness comes from the maturity of who you are in this moment, with your experience, your understanding, your self-leadership and guidance to move to what is right action for you in that moment. Okay. In corporates, we do a lot of leadership coaching. All we're doing is really enabling the leader to do the work of clearing and getting their shit out the way so that they can do what they already know how to do. one, you know, what we get to your question in a moment. One of your people had a question about what do you look for in a mentor. Well, personally, I wouldn't have anyone mentor me because they're just sharing their map of the world. I don't want their map of the world. I want to unlock and unleash my map of the world. And so developmental coaching, we don't give any advice. We don't give any, because the person has all the knowing within them. They already know what to do. They're just not doing it. And so developmental coaching is about unlocking what it is that stops them by clearing it out the way so that they can do what they already know how to do. And now they're not leading like someone else. They're leading from who they are in this moment, from their maturity and their experience here in this moment. And so it becomes a very personal expression. And that's what leading is. It's not copying. It's not, you know, taking down a strategy or following a step-by-step production model. It's going inside and leading from what is truly in here in an unleashed way. And so, you know, parenting is the same thing. You're leading a child. So it's you're not leading from your story, his story or her story. You're leading from this present moment, not your upbringing.
Okay. I can see that. So one of your bits of advice to answer the question was to come down and do one of the courses. So the first course is the NLP practitioner course. Is that correct?
Yep.
Oh, there's other shorter, like afternoon or weekend or one day courses. Is that also?
Yeah, we got a one-day parenting course we're launching in Sydney on the 8th of September this year. We'll run another one next year, and that is developmental parenting or enlightened parenting. It's called. So it's a one-day introduction. It's looking at parenting through the lens of NLP, but that's only one lens.
Yeah.
We're also using developmental psychology. We're also using when we talk about enlightened, that is literally waking up to what is true, the present moment. And so we're also bringing in some developmental models and understandings to truly reveal in that program that parenting isn't about changing your child, it's about changing you, you first. And so we've got quite a unique way of doing that. We also run the NLP practitioner course, and in Sydney and in Melbourne, we run that about 10 times a year. So they're running, you know, every month or so, you know, somewhere up and down the coast.
Okay. So what's involved? What would I go through and learn in the NLP practitioner course, the 8 days? What is the subjects covered? It's probably a better question.
Well, it's the subject is your subjective experience. So it's looking at how you do you and really stepping back and getting some objectivity to it so that you can work out what is it that I need to change. And so there is skill development, and there are 7 core skills we develop with you over the 8 days. Listening, to be able to listen at multiple levels. So if somebody's watching this video, they're going to see when I ask you a question, they're going to see that your eyeballs move around as you process. And that is giving me the patterns of your communication. And so whether you're processing visually on the inside, whether you're processing sound bites on the inside, whether you're feeling something or talking to yourself in your head, I can see because your eyes move in a patterned way, and I've already observed that very early on when you were talking about something or other. You're accessing and processing, and so I can now bring an understanding of how you're representing reality to yourself, and I can listen to the words that you use that fit with how you're processing. Mm-hmm. So some people might say, you know, do you see what I mean? And when they do that, they'll look up and left and they'll go, do you see what I mean? And what they're doing is they're quite literally on the inside seeing a movie that they're referencing and talking about using visual words. And so we're teaching you how to listen to the verbal tonality, to the words, to the presuppositions wired into the words, to the non-verbal, physiological, eye-accessing, changes in skin color, pupil dilation, changes in, so right now your resting bitch face, if you like, has just a little movement like that. And so here I can surmise, given you're listening and not processing, and there it goes back into the resting. So that this is probably your curious listening. That's a mind read on my part. Your curious listening pose. What state would you say you're in as you listen to me right now?
So I'm actively watching your face as well. So that's sort of one of the things I'm paying attention to. The state that I'm just deeply listening to what you're saying, and then relating it back to my own understanding of eye accessing cues, and also thinking about different sorts of facial expressions and whether they're getting more red. And also what I was thinking and considering as you were discussing all those points was, you said a mind read, which obviously you teach us not to mind read, but to calibrate and make sure it's like, hey, I noticed you did this. What's that about?
Yeah.
And rather than just going, oh, that person did this and that means that. And one of the reasons why there's a little frown on my brow is because of the sunlight here is usually I have a hat and I'm fine with that. But with the beanie, I'm sort of, and your face is very bright. So I'm sort of also squinting a little bit at that.
Yeah.
Which is
so I got
it's beautiful natural light. It helps my videos a lot, but
I got 2 bits of information there. So the first bit is that your listening style is, and there's your face again, do you see? And your eyes were pointing down, and actually your brow is giving you shade. So I know the light might have something to do with it, but not completely to do with it. Yeah. The second thing, I know you're relationally listening.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is the face of relational listening. Now that gives me information, because when it changes, I know you've moved from relational listening to something else. And so being able to listen to that gives me much more information than just the words you're using. Teaching someone to listen, teaching someone to then enable them to get into a deeper level of rapport with people at an unconscious level, so that the person's not aware of what you're doing through matching and mirroring, pacing and leading. Teaching people how to ask questions, and asking questions. Now you're trying not to do it. You're a funny man. Asking questions enables me to ask questions that facilitate a deeper understanding, like I just did with you a moment ago, that allow me to calibrate what's going on and therefore listen at a deeper level. Being able to then induce and lead your mind, body, emotional states enables me to have a massive amount of influence in our conversations and our relationship. And then me being able to give and receive feedback in a healthy, active way. They're all core skills of coaching and communicating. So that's one aspect. The second aspect of NLP is you're learning how you learn. And so you're understanding what your preferences are for learning. And by learning that, you can accelerate your capacity to learn and learn in the moment, and become literally a student of ongoing, unfolding, different levels of learning mastery. And then the third aspect is that you first and foremost get to learn about you, how you do you, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly, without judgment, by perceiving you, and then using that information to shift, change, and adjust, and then feed forward with new information, and use what you're getting fed back to shift, change, and adjust. So literally growing and developing yourself and so NLP is a developmental model. It is about learning how development works, and then actively going and influencing your own development, through time in an accelerated way. And then the fourth aspect of NLP is really coming together with a group of and a community of like-minded people. I mean, we've got a community of thousands of people. I reckon, seriously, the people in our community are deeply connected in terms of absolutely lifelong connected friends that they will never lose. we've had people, we've had, you know, dozens of people marry, couple, come together, now are a group, because they're connecting with people who are of a like, you use the word values, of a like value system that enables them to have very different kind of conversations that go past the superficial. And so having that network of like-minded people who are oriented toward life, toward development, is something that is very, very highly valued by our students. And so there are, you know, 4 key aspects there. And then, I mean, I could just go on, but learning how to use that with people in communication to have developmental conversations with anybody, anytime, any place it's a life skill. It's about unfolding you in an intentional way.
Fantastic. So my question would be then, what does the master prac, like obviously that would build, that's the next course after the practitioner course. What does that cover, or what does that build onto that's different to the practitioner course?
So the practitioner course is span. It is giving you a span of understanding of the key 5 domains of NLP,
mm-hmm.
and linking them all together and showing you how they all work in operation together and how they all come together in a single model.
Mm-hmm.
Master practitioner is depth. Master practitioner is embodied depth, to take the understandings that you have in cognition and to grok them down in your system and embody them,
mm-hmm.
and walk them in your life. And so it is such a big subject. You know, that 8 days is, and you probably recall your 8 days and Gina's 8 days. The 8 days is super intensive and quite a brain burner, because we're really showing you A, what you already know, but B, in a very, very different way. And then it's like a tsunami of information coming over. And then your system will settle after a while and settle into an understanding of how to be and how to live and how to communicate in this different way, and how to start utilizing this with yourself. Master practitioner takes it down and gives it to you in a deeply embodied way, and in a way that will transform, because it's looking at the structure of personality itself, utterly transform your personality in the way you want to transform it, by helping you let go of and clear the shit that gets in the way, that stops you from being you, from saying what you want to say when you want to say it, in a way that is right for you, but yet you're not saying it, and doing the things you want to do, that fear and anxiety and concern, fear of failure, that's stopping you from being the human being you already know how to be, but just aren't in your life. And so clearing all of that stuff out so that you can lean into being truly who you are in a self-actualized way is what Master Prac's about. Interesting.
I remember reading about Ken Wilber speaking about span and depth in his book, The Brief History of Everything. And it was interesting trying to understand it in the context he was talking about it, because I've listened to a bit of his work, I hear it in his voice as well, which it's both probably pros and cons. But that makes a lot of sense why the courses would be set up that way. So I suppose another question that I have, you go, sorry, mate.
Wilber's talking about span as a horizontal development. So span is, you know, growing a new skill, growing a new capacity, growing a new ability, a new understanding applied in a new way. It's about working on the stuff you need to work on. So changing the way you say something, you know, changing the way you approach your partner when you know they respond in a certain way, just shifting, changing and adjusting what it is you're doing, how it is you're going about doing that, and maybe even changing some of the thinking. But depth is what he talks about is vertical change, which is developmental change. And developmental change is changing value systems. And so a value system is a system inside of how you make meaning. So then depth or vertical development is about changing the whole value system that's making the meaning to be more inclusive and less exclusive. And that is the work, because NLP is a developmental model. That is the work of NLP, because what it reveals to us is the nature of which we create and hold on to the past through holding on to memories, which are structures which we created. They're not reality, but they're a representation of reality. And the future, which is wholly and completely constructed in a human mind. The future doesn't exist out here in reality. It's an unending evolution of the present. Future exists as a pure construct of mind. It's a movie in your mind. Then what Wilbur's pointing out is that as we develop through our understanding of ourselves and how we represent reality, we can start to let go of, because it's the representations that hold us back, we can start doing the work of clearing the old past representations and seeing through the construct nature of future representations in order for us to enable ourselves to just be here. This is where life exists. It doesn't exist in the past. That's already happened. Now you're just holding on to a facsimile, and it doesn't exist in the future because the future hasn't happened yet. It's a construct of mind. Life exists here in this moment. A.H. Almas, who's a writer in the world of spirituality, he says that it is interesting that the average human being lifespan's about 84 years these days. And he said that on average, a human being in the Western world is literally awake and present for about 4 to 5 of those years. And then he was giving an interview, and he said to the interviewer, he said, "That's quite young to die, don't you think?" And the interviewer cracked up. And he's very accurate there, that because we spend so much time in mind, we're missing our life. Mm. Yeah. And we do die young, as we do die immature. Immature isn't a value judgment. It is an immaturity in the scope of developmentally what maturity is.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the, I think one of the quotes that landed with me, understanding that concept, was the future is only reserved for the people that can live in the present. And what I understood from that was, once again, we talk about a future, but it's like if you can't live in the present moment, then when you get to the future, you'll plan the future. So,
and then you die.
Yeah. Well, you buy a caravan first, and then you die. Which is, I look totally, and I think that's something that looking at the Enneagram and understanding my Enneagram scores, and obviously it's a very fluid model, coming under a type 7 as the enthusiast and often being quite future orientated. I catch myself doing that, and without it first being told that I was actually doing that in my language, and having a coach like yourself and being able to observe when I'm starting to either get stressed or anxious about a future that may never happen, or maybe I'm in this meeting with you in this podcast, but I'm thinking about the next appointment, which is also with you, rather than actually being here and communicating and so on and so forth, and understanding that that's one of the ways that I'll accumulate only 4 to 5 years of life. And being like, fuck, right, okay, well, that's not of interest of mine. So when I catch myself, become aware of it, and then I had to, in the early days, also catch myself be judgmental about my awareness of it, and then be like, well, just be curious and just let it arise, become aware, and then come back to the present moment, which was a big tool for me anyway in understanding simple things like FOMO, fear of missing out, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Fear of constructing a future of missing out.
Yeah. Exactly right. So we don't have much time left at all. I was curious to learn a bit more about, which I thought we can probably go through this. What got you into learning this type of psychological work? What was, not all of your study, I suppose, but we don't have enough time to start a new podcast and do that. But what was the turning point for you to get into this sort of space?
A decision like it is for everybody. and it was a work situation in that I was in the corporate world in telecommunications, and I headed up the retail division for a telecommunications carrier, and you know, I loved what I did for many, many years. I really enjoyed the public nature of it, connecting with people, and connecting with so many different cultures of people right across Sydney, right across Australia. And it was, I loved it. It was exciting until really the organisation, you know, we were taken over by another larger organisation, and they had no idea of what it is we really did and how to maximize that. And so they ended up just strangling it and killing it, and that wasn't so much fun. And you know, I really saw the lack of developmental attitude, the lack of people, and the prioritization of, you know, a single bottom line really perturbed me, and I found it quite, you know, at the time, quite disturbing. And I was just starting to get curious about, you know, what was life really all about, and what was out there in terms of my own ongoing development. And I realized that even though there was tough situations, which I developed through without a doubt, it just wasn't the kind of atmosphere in which I could truly thrive. And so I left. But before I left, I was doing a management program, and I met an NLP trainer. Her name's Sylvia Fernandez. She's over in Singapore now. And she came and did a little bit of work on rapport with us. And a friend of mine had done some NLP years earlier. And, you know, I really clicked with her, and she said, just come along and do the program, and gave me a really good deal. So I did. And I loved it. I fell in love with NLP. And at first I liked the influential nature of it. I liked what I could do with it. You know, it was kind of, I felt like a bit of a god at the time. And then I began slowly but surely to realize that the amount of developmental potential it had for me as a human being was just unsurpassed anything. And I just immersed myself in it, and I read everything I could get my hands on, maybe 50 or 60 books. And I fell in love with that, and I did the master practitioner course. By this time I'd left the telecommunications carrier, and I'd gone and joined an engagement provider who was doing employee surveys. And so with that, I set up the coaching room part-time whilst I worked for them as well. And then about 4 years later, I stepped out of that wholly into the coaching room. I met the other managing partner, Joseph Scott, and we merged our businesses together and made the leap about 11 years ago to go and do this together. In the meantime, I'd done Master Prac, and I'd done what you're going to do this year, ACMC, and I'd gone and done trainers training, and I'd gone and done a whole lot of work with different developmentalists, and I'd expanded the amount of information I had. And when I met Joseph, he was an extraordinary human being in the field, like I had never seen. He had an understanding of the field of human development that was unsurpassed. It was way past, you know, the trainers that were teaching us. And he really liked my pragmatism, that I would take something and just run with it straight away. I wouldn't consider I'd put it into action. So that really worked well for us. And we came together and formed the coaching room, and, you know, have you know, gone on from there. It's been a long, we're like rock stars, you know, that a lot of people know about us, but really we're still completely and utterly unknown. And yet, you know, when people find out about us, they go, you know, you guys are extraordinary. What you're doing, you know, is like unsurpassed. And we're like, yeah, we've only been doing it for a decade. Like an old fucking rock band who's just been there twanging the guitar for a decade. And then someone comes along to one of our shows and they go, wow, these guys are amazing. We've had the same experience. That you know, the work that we do now is a culmination of a lot of years of giving ourselves to it. And you know, the work that we do because of Joseph's research and him giving himself, and therefore me giving myself to the process. You know, we are right on the cutting edge of human development. We do bring things in which nobody else is doing, and create models which nobody else has got access to, that are game changers in the field of high performance leadership, game changing in the field of high performance athleticism, game changers in the field of human development.
Great. Thank you. That's a thorough answer to my question.
Good.
And happy to be a part of it as well.
Yeah. So you're asking briefly about our influences. So my influences, originally Sylvia, a guy called Don Power, who's a beautiful human being up on the Gold Coast. He's now got Parkinson's disease, and you know, he's a real model for how to deal with a disease, because he just had, you know, the guy is 70, 75, 76. He just hasn't let him stop him. And he is just out there amongst it, just enjoying every bit of life that he possibly can. And he's a real inspiration to me, because he just hasn't he's at it for 10 years, and it's severe, but he just hasn't allowed it to define him. Ken Wilber would be another big influence. Terry O'Fallon would be another very big influence. Guys like Keegan, Bill Tolbert would be another key influencer. Obviously, from the field of NLP, Grinda Bandler, Milton Erickson and his work with hypnosis and hypnotic induction. Virginia Satir and her work with families and therapy and indeed language. I mean, these guys are the giants that we stand on the shoulders of, and we hope that one day people will stand on our shoulders and go much, much further than we're able to. And we're really starting to see that with our students there. Some of our students are stepping right up and really leading different areas, different institutions, different industries in just incredibly new and exciting ways. And so, you know, there's a lot of cultivation that goes on with the coaching room and our students as they really start to stand on our shoulders. Quite beautiful to see. Awesome,
mate. That's fantastic. And like I said at the start of this, around finding some organizations that I align with, I got a good vibe and good connection with the coach room from day one, and then you were part of the second 4-day component, and I've really appreciated the year of work since then. So yeah, thanks for doing for starting it in the first place.
You're welcome,
mate. We'll tie up the podcast there. Thank you very much for jumping on. If people want to find out more about the coaching room and yourself, where should they go?
thecoachingroom.com.au, and then under the heading NLP, you'll find all the different NLP courses, including the parenting course. So have a look under the menu, and then or jump on, find my profile. You know, drop me a message if you want to have a conversation, or you want to get in touch, or you want a question answered. You know, we're more than happy to provide that kind of service or information.
Fantastic, cool. All right, team, thank you very much for listening in. If you found this podcast beneficial and you have a friend that you think would also find it beneficial, then it would mean the world to me if you'd pass on to them. Show the love. Otherwise, until next time, peace and pizza. I'll see you guys soon.